Good afternoon to you. 306 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up, the latest updates on the speaker race. We'll give those to you moment by moment. Adam Brandon will be with us at 3:30 from FreedomWorks to talk about what we should expect, what we should want out of the next Speaker of the House. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer is here at 4 o'clock. We talked to him about the war in Israel and the U.S. response. Colonel Shaffer will give us his sense of that. And then Rabbi Yaakov Menken will be with us here today from the Coalition for Jewish Values. We'll talk about not only what's happening in Israel, but what's happening here in the United States as the left's anti-Semitism is on full display in the wake of that terror attack. We'll talk about that and so much more, and we'll chat with you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. A few short minutes ago, Matt Gaetz had this to say to the press.
I'm excited for him. Can't wait to go vote for Steve Scalise.
Absolutely.
Long live Speaker Scalise.
Do you think he has the votes on the floor? He was divided vote in there.
I sure hope so. We'll see some democracy in action.
Long live Speaker Scalise, says Matthew Gaetz. The update here, as you may have heard in the newscast just a moment ago, House Republicans have narrowly signaled their support for right now for Congressman Steve Scalise of Louisiana as their nominee for Speaker today, according to the Wall Street Journal's write-up of the stats here. But he had yet to sew up enough Republican support to get elected on the House floor, leaving members bracing for final twists in the leadership fight. In a secret ballot election, Republicans have voted 113 to 99 to select Scalise, who is now the chamber's majority leader, over Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio, a fiery conservative who chairs the Judiciary Committee and was backed by former President Donald Trump. The Republicans voted in a closed-door meeting. No cell phones were allowed. That's because everyone keeps leaking the proceedings to their various favorite members of the press. No cell phones were allowed. The two candidates gave their formal pitches Tuesday night, while both men picked up dozens of endorsements heading into the day. Many lawmakers hadn't said how they would vote or if they ultimately could support the other candidate. A full House vote for Speaker could come as soon as later in the day. That was this again. Remember now, this is a very live story. This was written a short while ago, but even that detail appears to have changed. With Congressman Tom Emmer of Minnesota, the House GOP whip, saying it could be as early as 3 p.m. 3 p.m., which of course just passed some 9 minutes ago. The House is split 221 to 212. That gives Republicans very little room to maneuver, that is. They need to have enough Republicans ultimately to cross the majority threshold to support who the next Speaker of the House is going to be. So that 3 p.m. number, 3 p.m. has, of course, come and gone. And what happened just a few moments ago is that the House gavelled in. They had they did the prayer, they did the Pledge of Allegiance, as they do on a customary basis to start the day. And then they immediately gavelled out. The House is now in recess. And it looks like, according to all of the political reporters who are crawling all over Capitol Hill right now, speaking to Republicans, that there will not be a vote on this speaker fight until tomorrow. Now, I assume things could change. You must always assume that. But at the moment, it looks like it's not going to happen until tomorrow. And presumably, the intervening hours are going to be used for whipping votes, getting people to actually support a candidate. Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of chaos here because the Washington Post, it's been maintaining a live blog of all of its political reporters, talking to everybody they could talk to figure out what the heck's going on here. And about 15 minutes ago or so, Congressman Jim Jordan, according to the Washington Post, had refused to endorse Speaker nominee Steve Scalise. In other words, Jim Jordan wasn't supporting, some 15 minutes ago or so, Steve Scalise to become the next Speaker of the House, meaning, okay, now we're in for a fight. He repeatedly rebuffed questions of his intentions when leaving the room. The conference is divided, Jim Jordan said. I hope we can come together. That's what he told reporters. But then minutes later, just minutes later now, the Washington Post just put up a dispatch that says the following: Representative Jim Jordan will back Representative Steve Scalise for House Speaker and has offered to give a nominating speech on Scalise's behalf, according to a spokesperson for Jordan. So that is Tasmanian devil spin. I mean, it's just things are moving quickly here. So we went from Jordan not supporting Scalise to now Jordan is going to actually back him, and he's willing to give a nominating speech on Scalise's behalf. And that was just in the course of, say, 10 minutes or so that developed. If that's true, Jim Jordan has been, I think, an extraordinarily good sport here for each of these fights. Remember, he supported McCarthy in the first place. He spoke on McCarthy's behalf when they ousted him. And now it appears that the Republican conference is going to support Steve Scalise. Jim Jordan, if this Washington Post latest report is correct, is going to step back and say, okay, Scalise has it. He's the guy. And if you're looking for any signal from the insurgents, from the rebellion, people like Matt Gaetz, well, look no further than the audio I played for you at the outset today. He said, long live Speaker Scalise. And I realize you could listen to that and think, okay, maybe he's mocking Steve Scalise or something. But remember, Gaetz said, even before ousting McCarthy, that he could support Scalise. Now, upside, downside to all of this, because it does matter. Scalise is really the only one of the three viable speaker candidates. And in that, I'm including not only Jim Jordan, but also Kevin Hearn. He's the only one who really doesn't control himself when it comes to Ukraine funding. The other two, in previous votes and conversations, have routinely said, we need to be really careful before we fund Ukraine. In fact, we should be funding and enforcing our own border before we give out any more money on this Ukraine thing. Scalise isn't like that. Scalise is much more on the let's give Ukraine lots of money side of things. He has been on any number of votes on that subject. So that is a meaningful difference. And I wonder to what extent that difference may show up in the fights over the next 24 hours. Jordan, for his part, we've flagged it here, we've talked about it, is known as a guy who's very close to the big tech companies. Well, that's a problem, isn't it? Jordan, really talented on a host of issues, especially going after the weaponization of government, no question. But one way in which the government has certainly weaponized itself against the American people is its coziness with the tech companies and getting the tech companies to do its bidding to censor the American people. Jim Jordan, Steve Scalise, or any other Republican who occupies this position needs to know what time it is on this subject. So are there upsides and downsides to these guys? Yeah, absolutely. No question on both sides here. But at the moment, just on the basic news, it looks like Steve Scalise will prevail for now. Jim Jordan supports him. Matt Gaetz supports him. And my guess is the votes in favor of Scalise are going to start ramping up pretty dramatically, especially if Jim Jordan, again, supports the guy. We will get updates on this coming up from Adam Brandon, like I said, from FreedomWorks at 3:30. We'll kind of dive into some of the issues here, what a new speaker means for Republicans. I will say one thing that is crazy to me is that over the last week, people who were upset that McCarthy was ousted in the first place, after this invasion in Israel, they said, how do you feel now? How do you feel now? People are like screaming at the people who ousted McCarthy. Look what you did, you idiots. You got rid of McCarthy. We need him right now. For what? What do you need him for? Even McCarthy, he did an interview with, I think, Guy Benson earlier this week. He said, no. Patrick McHenry, this Speaker pro tem, he's perfectly capable of leading the House right now while we're trying to figure out who the new Speaker is. Any votes you need, you can do. You can do them right now. You don't have to wait for a new Speaker. But there are a bunch of people trying to confirm their priors that McCarthy shouldn't have been unseated. McCarthy not helping in that argument this week. We've got coming up Adam Brandon is going to join us in this very thing. And I also want to jump into Israel now and give you some updates, all of the breaking news headlines. But before I do, I'll take a quick phone call. We've got Deborah in Springfield. She'll help kick us off on Israel. Deborah, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. Thank you for taking my call. Appreciate your program very much.
Thank you.
I'm huge fans of yours. I just wanted to say, I know you didn't start with us. You started with the House Speaker story, but I've been watching a lot of news, and what I can see is that the people of Israel were completely defenseless. They had no way to defend themselves. And so I just want to say that I think this is a good example of why we need to keep the Second Amendment. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, the number of Israelis that carry guns is, according to John Lott, who keeps track of gun data, not only in the United States but around the world, is 3% of the Jewish population of Israel have guns. Now, I can't speak with any specificity to gun laws in Israel, but if it's that low, 3%, then that really does tell a story, doesn't it? I mean, you have a situation where guns personal defense weapons would have been essential here, as you had small arms fire and terrorists come raiding your communities. And these people were left defenseless. They were just left utterly defenseless. And here in the United States, Deborah, one of the lessons that I would take away from this, first of all, we are the beneficiary of having two oceans to either side of us. That's a big deal. But we have an open southern border right now, through which millions of people we don't know are pouring across as we speak. And what does that mean for us? As they say, when seconds count, the police are minutes away. You've got to protect your family. And I love this whole, like, the left is constantly like, the only thing you need a gun for is hunting and target shooting, and the deer aren't wearing Kevlar vests, right? That's the Joe Biden explanation. But the reality is of the Second Amendment is that we do have that Second Amendment right, God-given Second Amendment right. The reason it's enshrined is for the protection of our families from enemies, both foreign and domestic. God forbid you have to be in a situation where you have to protect your family. But it is an essential component to protecting your family, isn't it, Deborah?
Absolutely. And the thing is with that open borders, you don't know who's coming across and how did they get all those weapons? How did we know those weapons aren't already here? They're just waiting to go at it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's more questions than answers, unfortunately, and a lot of the answers I fear are very scary, Deborah. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Yeah, no, there's the self-defense critical, the defense of families, to protect some of these women, these children, these babies from the gruesome outcomes that they were subjected to this past weekend in Israel. And the fighting continues. The fighting continues. Hezbollah launching all sorts of rockets. Hamas just getting absolutely obliterated now because Israel is fighting back, as they should. But a lot of concern about what comes next. And we'll get into a lot of those details coming up. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer is going to join us at 4 o'clock on that as well. The data for you today, the unfortunate data today, includes that we now know that there are at least 22 Americans who are dead. At least 22 Americans. That's a number that, of course, as you would expect, that's a rising death toll among American citizens killed here. We don't know how many of those Americans were dual citizens. It's not an unusual circumstance for an American to be a dual citizen in Israel. But as the White House pointed out today correctly, John Kirby said today correctly, if they have an American passport, they are Americans, and we treat them, regardless of dual citizenship, as Americans and as an American priority. That's the right thing to say, and certainly the right way to act. At least 17 Americans are now unaccounted for. That can mean any number of things. It could mean that they're among the dead. We just don't know it yet. It could be that they're just missing because of all of the chaos. And additionally, it could be that they're hostages in the hands of Hamas, an Iranian-backed terror organization. The White House said today that a number of Americans are being held hostage. That was something that they told us yesterday. They further confirmed it today. John Kirby said that we should steel ourselves that more for the eventuality, that is, that more Americans are actually being held than currently known. I don't think that comes from a hip shot from John Kirby. That strikes me as American intelligence. They know that there are even more Americans who they believe are hostages right now. They just don't have the details to fully confirm that. But yet another situation during the Biden years where Americans are being held hostage behind enemy lines. This is a very gruesome situation. Hamas is pledging to execute hostages in order to try and stop the Israeli defense here. The Israelis are firing on Hamas, as you would expect. One other piece, and again, John Kirby was right to say this today. He was asked about some members of the press. I don't know what they're thinking, but I know what they're thinking. They're rooting on Hamas or something because they're asking questions like, what are you going to do to stop Israelis from killing civilians? This was a real question that was put to John Kirby today. And Kirby responded by saying, Hamas is who killed civilians. Hamas is who went in on the weekend and killed civilians. And now, one of the products of war here is that Hamas is using civilians as human shields as Israel defends itself. He said they should stop setting up their military operations in hospitals and schools. He's right about that. I don't usually say those words on a routine basis. But that is true. More out of the White House coming up.
Is the amount of oil that's being brought in by Iran, specifically records amount, 85% to China, and more oil being sold above the price cap from Russia, giving the president any pause on changing these energy policies for fossil fuels here in the U.S.?
Let me back up a little bit. I mean, important to remember that Iran gets most of its oil revenue off the black market, and evading sanctions, which they do. It's costly to them. In fact,
the Biden administration has been letting Iran get away with evading these sanctions like crazy.
Our evidence is that they really only receive a fraction of the market value of the oil that they sell because they have to sell it on the black market. We will always, as we do in any case, typically revisit sanctions regimes to see if
they're selling records amounts of oil to China
need to be changed or adjusted, specifically with respect to Iranian oil. The president, since the beginning of the administration, had been concerned about making sure we have a viable global market for oil, working hard to keep the prices of gasoline down here in the United States.
Stop.
Part of that is making sure you remove some of the volatility in that global supply and demand. I don't have any announcements or decisions to make today with respect to any changes to the domestic oil production.
But isn't it a national security issue when you have countries that are profiting off of oil and the increased price of oil that don't like Israel, that don't like America?
We don't want, for instance, Russia to be able to get a windfall in profits.
Wait, what?
From the oil market, so that they can then turn that around and
but that's what they're doing.
And apply that to weapons in Ukraine.
That's what they're doing.
We certainly don't want to see Iran be able to do much of the same, which is why we're putting as much pressure on them as we are.
So why not increase oil production here?
I don't have any announcements to make.
They just keep admitting it. They just keep admitting Biden is making all of this possible. I don't have any announcements on changing that anytime soon, says John Kirby during the adult press briefing today. Coming up, Adam Brandon will be with us minutes from now. Good afternoon to you. 3:35 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up today, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer joins us at 4 o'clock. We'll talk about the war in Israel and the American military moving in that direction. Some Navy ships headed to the Eastern Mediterranean right now. Rabbi Yaakov Menken will be with us today from the Coalition for Jewish Values. We talked to him at 5:30 about the situation in Israel and all of this anti-Semitism from the left here in America that's really exploded into full public view over the course of the last few days. What to do. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. As I mentioned, coming into the top of the hour, we have some news for you on the speaker race. It looks like at the moment that Steve Scalise is likely to become the next speaker, but it is not a sure thing. At the moment, he has the support of 113 Republicans, as opposed to the 99 who voted behind closed doors today to support Jim Jordan for the role. According to the Washington Post, Jim Jordan is now backing Steve Scalise for House Speaker and has offered to actually give him a nominating speech. Those votes could take place tomorrow, but a lot of vote whipping going on behind the scenes as we speak. For more on this, I want to bring in Adam Brandon. He's the president of FreedomWorks and joins us now. Adam, good to have you with us, sir.
Well, thanks very much for having me. It seems every single time we talk, there's some kind of world disaster happening. So
yes.
So thanks for having me on.
Of course, always good to have you, Adam. Well, we like having you on because you can help sort through all of this mess. The speaker race, an important one, and it looks like these guys are trying to settle out their differences behind closed doors. Do you think that this will be as dramatic as when Kevin McCarthy was elected the first time?
I kind of do. Like, Steve Scalise won this vote, but so did Kevin McCarthy. I mean, the vote he won was just a majority of the Republican conference, but you still got to get to 218 votes. And I've been saying there's a lot of different pathways for a lot of different people to get to 200 votes. It's at last squarely less than 20. They're going to be the problem. And frankly, I don't see a lot of these issues resolved right now. And you just have a handful of people that don't go along. This thing drags on. Remember, it's not 20, 15, or 50 people.
Well, hold on a second.
5 people have a problem.
Hey, Adam, I'm just because your signal is breaking up like crazy right now. We're gonna hang up on you. We're gonna call you back because I want to see if I can get this connection to be a little bit better. I need a clear shot with Adam Brandon here. So let's hang up on Adam. Let's give him a buzz back and see if we can reconnect with him. But what you just heard Adam saying in a stuttering way, unfortunately, is that this isn't necessarily a sure thing, and this very much could be like the drama that we just saw with Kevin McCarthy in his election at the beginning of the year. God, I hope not. I do hope. I have to be like a lot of other people, and you hope that, well, this is going to be a cleaner bout. One of the differences here is it seems that the people who made McCarthy's rise difficult are likely to support Scalise now if Matt Gaetz is any indication. Because Gaetz is saying today, here again, audio of Matt Gaetz talking about Steve Scalise, a man who he supported even before he ousted Kevin McCarthy. Here's what Gaetz had to say today.
I'm excited for him. Can't wait to go vote for Steve Scalise.
Absolutely.
Long live Speaker Scalise.
Do you think he has the votes on the floor? If he was divided vote in there.
I sure hope so. We'll see some democracy in action.
We'll see some democracy in action. Adam Brandon joins us yet again. Adam, are you good now?
Oh, yeah, I hope so. Boy, I apologize for that.
That's
but,
okay. You're coming through loud and clear now. Thank you.
Well, I was saying earlier, it's really easy for these different folks to get to 200, 210 votes. It's getting over that 218. And I think there's also, remember, we got a situation here with a lot of personal hard feelings right now. And there's a lot of people saying, hey, I'm not going to vote for Scalise or I'm not going to vote for Jordan. So this may continue for a little bit until they can find a deal that works for everyone. But the longer this drags out, I start thinking about other names out there like Tom Emmer from Minnesota. You might start Kevin Hearn. You might start hearing other names pop up into the mix if you can't get a deal done in the next 24, 48 hours.
What are the factions that are involved here? I mentioned a couple of. Jim Jordan. It looks like he's trying to be gracious here. Apparently, he's ready to support Scalise and even give a nominating speech on his behalf. Matt Gaetz, who of course was at the center of ousting Kevin McCarthy, has just indicated that he's prepared to support Scalise. What are the factions to look out for here?
Well, so you've got the some of the harder core of the House Freedom Caucus that will look at Scalise and just say, hey, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. So you're going to have some people that want a clean switch. Then you're going to have other people from, say, some of these more centrist sides of the GOP, and they're going to take a look and be like, I just don't see a big difference between these folks. And then you're going to have other people on some more archaic rules, such as like motion to vacate. Do you keep that? Do you get rid of that? So it's kind of a mess. A lot of the same issues that brought down Kevin McCarthy are still going to be here right now.
Yeah.
You still have to go through all these appropriations bills, and then you still have to pass. This other question is looming over this continuing resolution in mid-November that comes up.
The reporting
is there going to be time?
Yeah, the reporting about this meeting, the meetings between Republicans, Adam Brandon, are that both Steve Scalise, at least what I've seen, Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan both indicated that it looks like another continuing resolution is likely to have to occur given the short time frame to get these bills passed.
Because actually, I don't see other way. You've lost valuable time in the appropriations process with this exercise. So that's why, look, if I was at a Vegas window right now placing my bet who the next speaker is between Jim Jordan or Scalise, I'm probably going to go other at the moment. And that's where I start looking at down the list here, people like Tom Emmer coming up. They're just going to sit back, and sooner or later the temperature is going to ratchet up. And I would give a 30% chance the nuclear option happens, where 5 Republicans break free and find some kind of coalition with Hakeem Jeffries, and you have a weird hybrid coalition government. The longer this stretches out, the more that could be possible.
What lunatics would do that? Who would do a Hakeem Jeffries speakership?
Let's just see how broken the GOP is right now. Maybe there is that proverbial come to Jesus moment that people come and say, hey, we are staring at the abyss right now.
Yeah.
Let's find what we can agree upon. And then, look, a lot of the complaints against McCarthy is he waited too long on appropriations. Well, that ship sailed. So you're just going to have to make sure that for like next year and all
Right.
You're getting people working earlier, because a lot of this is too late in the process. So
Sure,
you're going to
yeah.
have to do a continuing resolution and then set into the fight.
And if you're Steve Scalise, if you're Jim Jordan, if you're whoever the next speaker is, the truth is you can't be held accountable to Kevin McCarthy's promises. You're not the one who made those promises at the outset. You're going to have to come to another agreement with the guys who elect you here. But on these candidates, and you point out there's a chance here that an outsider could rise, and it's a non-zero chance in your view for sure. Steve Scalise, let's begin with him. My view of the distinctions between these guys is insofar as they're measurable, is Scalise has been much more of a yes vote on Ukraine funding without any additional strings attached than the other guys. My guess is if anything's going to pop up in the next 24 hours that's going to create some debate, it's probably that issue.
I would say that's definitely one of the major sticking points. That's one. The motion to vacate is going to be another. I think you're also just this general. I'm sure they're asking in these phone calls, what level of appropriations are you okay with? These are all things that have to get sorted out. But how fast are you moving on aid to Israel? I mean, these are things that will have to be discussed quickly. And right now, I just don't see a clear way to do AT for any of these guys. Right. And hence, that's why I come back to I see someone else potentially popping up that they could get behind so they could move quickly on these things.
Yeah, I did see reporting that apparently Congressman Ken Buck has been a royal pain in the rear in the last 24, 48 hours. He keeps showing up at these conference meetings and asking each of the candidates for a litmus test on whether they think the last election was stolen. And how dare you for saying Joe Biden would be involved in rigging an election? I don't really understand the point that Ken Buck's trying to make.
Well, look, every one of these, when you only have a majority and you can only lose a few people, and with weddings and sickness, sometimes your majority's down to one or two people at this point. Everyone has the floor. Everyone's got an ability to grab that microphone. And this is the problem. This is where, again, I see a lot of pathways for people to get to 200 votes. Those last handfuls, those are incredibly difficult. And, I've made the decision at FreedomWorks to kind of keep my guys out of this race and not have an opinion, because this is a family food fight. This reminds me of some of the worst fights my brothers and sisters and I have ever had growing up. So it's kind of, I think what's happening in the caucus is there's just a lot of hurt feelings. And when you start operating from emotion and not reason, a whole lot of new weird things come up that may not necessarily be important that day.
But the optimist in me detects that this is useful insofar as we can establish what is actually a priority for the American public. And having this debate, having this fight right now, is a useful opportunity for the rest of us to inject some sense into it. So, obviously,
great point.
The Kevin McCarthy thing, you love him or hate him, the people who threw him out. The case they made in public was that spending is completely out of control and he didn't do enough to arrest it, didn't keep his promises. And so it seems to me that is an important consideration. I mean, we used to talk about this in terms of what we're going to leave our grandchildren. At this point, I think it's safe to say that our own retirements are imperiled.
Look, you're talking about, we did put a statement out that we hope whoever is the next speaker, one thing they were moving on was a debt commission, basically starting a committee similar to what we did with Simpson Bowles how many years ago, to actually take a serious, deep look at the long-term fiscal health. I read a study this morning out of Wharton that was really bleak that said it, and they estimated trends continue in 20 years. There's no possible way, even if you taxed everyone at 100%, we could pay our debt, which means the United States is careening towards a default in about 20 years. But you look at down the road, just a handful of years, Social Security, Medicare, this debt crisis is real. I think the next time you go to buy a car or a house and you're complaining about how high interest rates are, that's not the Fed's problem. That's the bonds. That's this debt coming home. For the first time in my lifetime, all this $33 trillion in debt that we have, this is becoming the issue now. This is going to impact your life. This isn't something down the road. So something you just said, I think, is absolutely true. This is a moment for Republicans to decide what they want to be when they grow up ahead of the 2024 elections. And if they could show they're the reasonable, responsible adults on spending in this country, I think this is a case where good policy makes good politics.
Also, the other side of it is the politics of everything. Jim Jordan is a very capable and aggressive chairman of the Judiciary Committee. It is not the pattern in the United States where the Speaker of the House is either a member or a chairman of any of these committees. They would be essentially removing an efficient chess piece from the board if Jim Jordan were to become Speaker. In that sense, it does make more sense for Steve Scalise to take the role than Jordan.
Well, one other thing just to look at, I think that is a very key thing. I mean, there's no one who's a better attack dog on when it gets into a committee. Jim Jordan takes his responsibility on oversight very seriously. But I've got to point out one thing that members have told me off the record that they're really looking for is which one of these members is going to help them raise the money. And a lot of it always does come down to the money. And yes. I think behind the scenes, that's another argument that they're going to be having is who's willing. I always tell the story about Kevin McCarthy. When he used to walk into his office, he had a bowl, and it was a large bowl. And in that bowl was every room key from every hotel he had stayed at recently. And it was sending a message that is like, while you're going home to hang out in your district, my butt's on the road fundraising. And so he that was his whole thing was, I'm Speaker because I can raise the money.
Right.
And I think other Republicans had issues like, okay, so Speaker's also about policy. And I think that's where some of the complaints were coming in. But yes, the new Speaker is going to have to win the conference over on policy, but they're also going to have to show, hey, in a tightly contested midterm, I'm able to raise you the dough.
Yeah. And also, whoever becomes Speaker, their obligation is to win a wide enough margin that they can have a couple of people in the conference throw them out. You know what I mean? It's like McCarthy, for all of the talk, It is true that McCarthy was obsessed with elections, as you should be probably as Speaker. He was obsessed with raising money. He knew granular detail about every district in the country. That's all true. But he had a skin of his teeth majority in the House. And that's why people like Matt Gaetz had the ability to remove him, because the margins were just too tight.
If this is my advice to Republicans, you want to win a broad majority, you got to perform in these purple districts, and you've got to pick off a blue district. It's not enough just to win in red districts. And I tell you, these college-educated swing voters, they pay a lot of taxes, and they know that this fiscal crisis is coming for them. So when you can start to connect your policy on the Hill to what these people are paying in taxes and getting ahead of this debt crisis, you're about to open up to millennials and other new swing voters that Republicans have struggled with in recent cycles. So again, good policy makes good politics.
All right, Adam Brandon, thank you as always, sir, president of Freedom Works. Really appreciate your time today, and thanks for reconnecting to get that phone fixed up. It worked perfectly.
Well, I
Thank
apologize for that. I feel I've got all these beautiful things to say, and if I'm stuck on a bad phone line, I do apologize.
You know, I have no idea whose fault it is, but I'm perfectly comfortable blaming you. Thank you, Adam, very much. Really appreciate it.
Take care.
All right. Let's take D calling in from New Jersey, line 1. D, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince, you're a very intelligent young man. I appreciate your show.
Oh, God bless you. Thank you.
You're welcome. I would like to see Steve Scalise be the Speaker and let all Americans, every time he gets in front of a TV camera, all Americans should understand that man was shot by a Democrat.
Yeah.
And I think Chris Plant brought that up when we did the Kevin McCarthy Speaker thing that was going on. But I think it would be a reawakening for Kennedy Democrats because, I mean, their leader was shot by a Palestinian. So people better wake up and look at what the Democrat Party is becoming.
He did survive. He did survive a grievous wound from a Bernie Sanders campaign volunteer by the name of James Hodgkinson, a Democrat who had a list of Republican names in his pocket when he opened fire on a baseball field full of Republican lawmakers in Alexandria just a couple years back. And the only reason that those guys survived, there were guns on hand because Steve Scalise, as a member of leadership, had Capitol Police protection. They were able to fire back. Were it not for them, a whole bunch of Republicans would have been massacred that day. There's no question. Steve Scalise is alive by the grace of God. And in that sense, he is a reminder of the extremism that definitely exists on the left, as having survived that. All right, coming up, we've got Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer joining us just minutes away. We talked to him about the latest out of Israel and U.S. warships now on the move.